Bine v-am găsit! Suntem în data de 23 iulie 2022. Suntem pe Valea Avrigului, la modulul numărul 3 de pregătire în Constelații Familiale. Modul în care abordăm pe parcursul a 4 zile mișcarea sau dinamica cunoscută de mișcare întreruptă către mamă. Iar pentru acest modul am un invitat pe care cu siguranță îl cunoașteți, este vorba de Barbara Morgan. Barbara va lucra, spuneam, timp de 4 zile cu grupul pe care l-am în pregătire ca trainer invitat, în mod clar pe această dinamică. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. It's quite a while you haven't been in Romania. I think it's last 3 years you...
3 years, I think about 3 years, pre-COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So, because you're one of the first generation facilitators, one who worked directly with Bert Hellinger, you've been also one of the pioneers who brought the family constellation work in Romania. Would you like to share some thoughts about us when you first arrived here? How did you got here, and how you felt and sensed the world when you got in Romania, bringing this new and revolutionary work?
Yeah, it was very interesting the way it all started. I had a phone call out of the blue from Aurel Mucanu, who you know, and he said, my name is Aurel Mucanu. Would you be willing to come to Romania and do some training in family constellations? At the time, I was just living up in Hertfordshire, working very locally, running workshops, not thinking really beyond that very much, thinking I might just take apprentices, not have any training or anything. And so I took a deep breath, thought to myself, where exactly is Romania? I knew it was over there somewhere in the east of Europe. That's as far as it went. And I said yes. And initially I came over and I think I ran an introductory weekend. I can't remember if I did training immediately.
You remember what year it was?
2009, September 2009, I think. Yeah. And what struck me about the people was several things. One is what a deeply traumatized country it is, how the Romanians managed their trauma. So there was a lot of humor happening in the breaks, a lot of laughter happening in the break. And during the constellations, I noticed they talked and talked and talked a lot. And I wasn't used to that. And I tried to slow them down and say, how about you just talk a little less, and that sort of thing. And I remember one particular occasion when I asked a woman, how come when I ask you to stop talking, you carry on? And she said, if I stop talking, I'll just collapse in a heap. So then I felt some acceptance, some compassion for the way that Romanian people, of course it's not all of them, but seem to manage their trauma. The other side of that was I found them very warm, very welcoming of me all the way through. I've never felt anything else, and that's been really wonderful. And interestingly, I would walk into the shop sometimes and I see the shopkeepers, they don't smile. And I think, oh, they're a bit dour, you know. But there's something really truthful about that. And I compared it to England, where my daughter was training as a teenager, 15-year-old, in one of the shops, and they said to them, you have to smile at the customers and be polite. And she said, no way, you know, if I feel in a bad mood, I'm going to be in a bad mood. So I appreciated the authenticity of that. And of course, once you start talking, then everything changes. And I find that your people really warm and generous-hearted as well. So I feel very welcome here, and it's a beautiful, beautiful country.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here. So, like I said, you've been one of the pioneers who brought this work here in Romania, and you had a significant impact on the work in Romania, and somehow, thanks to you also, this work could flourish. I know you had training since you came in 2009 until 2018, if I'm not wrong.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
and
Yeah.
the last bit of training you had in Romania, we did it together in Mișcarea.
Yeah.
So if you think about 2009 and you look at those things you just mentioned now, if we go, fast forward and we're coming to 2022, how do you feel, or how do you sense the country, the field, the people, and the things that are going on here right now compared to your first impressions that you had when you came here?
It feels to me like there is a real ripeness for the work here now. When I first started, I felt a kind of desperation, and I do remember with several people saying, "Slow down." You know? They wanted to do the next constellation and the next constellation and the next constellation without really looking at the ones that they'd done already. So there was a real desperate need to get through all the trauma as quickly as possible. And now I do feel that there is a deepening, a greater acceptance of we have to move slowly. This is a movement of the soul. And if we take it right up to this training, you know, this particular group that we're in the fourth session with, fourth module with, I feel they're really ready for much deeper work than used to be the case. So I think it's been a long journey in Romania, and we're in a very different place now. Thanks to you as well. You know, you've really grabbed hold of the reins and really run with them, and you've spread the work far and wide.
Yeah, well, I'm just a part of the whole picture also. I did a lot of work, it's true, but there are also some other people who contributed to the growth of the field and the work in Romania. And some of these people have been trained by you, and but they also been trained by other people who were present in Romania, or the work was brought from people from Romania who went abroad and then trained themselves there, and then they got back here. So if we're looking at the particularity, the cultural particularity of this place, because you're coming from UK, which is a completely different culture than what it is here. You just mentioned a few of the challenges that you had when you start here. Are there others, and are they still present today?
Yeah, I think one of the most shocking things I experienced here was the number of abortions that had taken place, such that it got to the point where I would ask people, how many have you had, rather than have you had any? And that is really different in England. It's not that there aren't abortions, there are, of course, but the numbers here really shocked me. And I talked to some colleagues about it in Romania, and I researched it, and I read some books about it, and I got to really understand what that abortion was about. You know, that there was so much poverty, there was no access to contraception, people living out in the middle of nowhere. There was just a local midwife who performed the abortions as a kind of contraception. So it made a lot of sense to me. And then with Ceausescu trying to ban abortions and interfering in women's lives, that had a really worse effect. So it's a very powerful, traumatic scene in Romania, the whole issue of abortion and the effects of abortion and living with the effects of abortion.
And unfortunately, we know very well that goes through generations.
Yes.
And maybe from now on, there's also other generations who will be affected by, these abortions, and maybe some other things that, happen in this country. You were mentioning the fact when you came here that you saw that there was a lot of humor, and the way we, this society, or the way we are connecting with our suffering. And this is part of maybe the culture, laughing of our suffering or not treat it seriously. And it's a way of survival. It's a mechanism of surviving. So do you see it? Well, you're just here for a few days, but did you feel it? It's still there, or we are above that place of surviving and we're stepping to the healing to a healing place, or maybe we're stepping into the adult energy?
Yeah, difficult to know exactly, because different fields operate differently. But I don't feel that the use of humour as a survival mechanism as much anymore. Definitely not. And the other thing I've noticed that seems to be different is I remember right at the beginning thinking, there's not much tenderness in this culture. You've had to learn to become hard to manage. And I feel that's shifting. And I felt like in Britain we're just like porcelain dolls. So I remember falling over once, and thinking, oh, I don't know if I've sprained my ankle, not sure I can get up. And the person I was with said, oh, of course you can, go on, up you get. So there was a kind of a diminishing, if you like, of what I perceived as my suffering. But it made me feel really humble. I thought, yeah, we're very lucky in Britain. We've of course had some trauma and some way back, although we wouldn't be such perpetrators. But in my lifetime, as a nation, we've had very little. We've been basically free. So it made me appreciate my own culture much more. And I saw some of the differences between us. Yeah.
So it's interesting when we're connecting with different fields and different areas that we have a clearer image about our field or the field we're coming from, and we start appreciating and being grateful
Yeah.
for the things we're not looking like that at that every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember queuing for the bank once with a colleague, and I'd got I don't know what it was, a 500 lei note that I couldn't find in England. So we were queuing, and I was complaining because we were there about half an hour. And she says, "You're complaining? We used to queue for 4 hours. There was one bank in Bucharest, you know." So the memory of communism is still very live, of course. So it's really interesting and quite an insight for me to see what you've been through as a nation. And then the other side of that, I was with you in Timisoara when the government were trying to do something corrupt, and everyone was out on the streets, you know, and I was so inspired by that. I thought, that's amazing. All over the country. And would that happen in Britain? Probably not. We're too apathetic. We have life too easy.
So it seems that we still have some spark inside of us which are trying to pull us or push us towards a place of clarity and truth and maybe freedom.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the things that we really didn't had during the communist time. So we had 50 some years when we were not allowed to, where we were allowed to speak, but we had to be careful of how we're speaking and what we're speaking about. We had basically no freedom of traveling outside of the country. The only luxury we had is, reading books, more or less, because we didn't have a TV program more than 2 hours a day, and it was only propaganda. And I think somehow this sense of humor developed also from that place of not being allowed to really fully express ourselves. So we moved it, transcended to this, humor in order to express our grief and our sadness and also our pain. Um, I would go back a little bit again to the early years in Romania, and maybe you could share a little bit how was it for you? What were you doing? I remember you were doing workshops, but you were doing also training. And how were your early years? What have your maybe biggest achievement or what really touched you deeply, and what have been maybe the most difficult challenges that you had in the early years?
So some of the early challenges I remember are that I was really shocked that nothing came up in the constellations about the orphanages. And that was the one thing I knew about Romania more than anything else, because it reached the international media. And so even now, I still don't see that coming up in the constellations. So it's really interesting that it seems to be, I don't know if it's a blind spot or what it is in the culture, but the issue of abortions has been around a lot. And I remember one very moving abortion where a woman was the only surviving child, and she had 32 aborted siblings. And we put out pairs of shoes for each of these 32, and she walked along the line of shoes and bowed to each one. It was deeply moving. So that was one that stood out for me. But there were many. And children or grandchildren atoning for aborted children from before by not having children of their own. And a lot of them were angry and upset about it all. Yeah.
Yeah, like you just said in the beginning, we are very traumatized people in this part of the world, and maybe some of the behavior that we see now in the society is coming from those places of trauma that we suffered for such a long time. And my question would be, from your experience, of course, you cannot have a clear or sharp answer, but how long this could take to overcome this cultural or greater trauma which is present in the society. Some people are talking about 20 years, 40 years, a generation, 2 generations. How do you see it?
I would say probably a couple of generations, really. I mean, if you look at South Africa, apartheid is over, but it certainly isn't past. And if you go to the country, the prejudice is still very embedded in the culture. So it's going to take several generations. But the younger generation are beginning to ask questions and challenge their parents. So I see that. I don't know how many generations on that is. I imagine, your children, your grandchildren maybe will begin to develop in a different way, assuming there's no more trauma. And of course, with Ukraine and Russia on your borders, then there may be more trauma to come.
Yeah, it seems that this conflict, which is happening, like you mentioned, close to the border, has awakened some old traumas present in ourselves, and people have had different reactions to it. Some people get really anxious, some other people felt really insecure, some people really wanted to flee from the country because they were not feeling that this is a place to live anymore, not only because of the conflict, but also due to what is happening now in the country. And what I'm seeing from this place of working in the field is that it's a very strong and deep loyalty to the past. Even we've been through the communist time and the majority of the population has suffered, there are still manifestations in the field, especially for the oldest generation, that are hanging on to, this old society from the communism. And sometimes you can hear people, oh, before it was better. So there is this attachment, this bond to the past. So how do you see this? How is it possible to overcome or to step out of this place of entanglement?
Yeah, I think loyalty happens on many different levels. We can be loyal to our parents, but we're also loyal to our community and our culture and the way we are in our country. And sometimes we try and rebel against it and we do something completely different. But then we always return. That home is inside us no matter what we do. But as I've been saying on this module on trauma, everyone has trauma to some extent or another, and nations have trauma. But what's at the core that really helps us is our attachment to our parents. And if we can shift that, however traumatized our parents are, then we have self-agency and we can guide our way through trauma differently, with more strength, more resources, more ability to resolve something for ourselves. Even if that means escaping from the country, it's doing something active and not becoming helpless and collapsing under it.
Yeah, it makes sense. So since you brought it up about this module and what we're doing here, in this module is the fourth module on this fourth edition of the training, a training that has been initiated in 2016, I guess, and that was the first training we did together.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful that you've been one of my guides in this work. And actually, what I'm saying mostly of the time is that the fundament that you laid out, it's still present with me, and I took that from you when I'm doing this work. And for me, it was a great place, a step-up place to be, partner with you in that first training. And somehow you have always been present, even though you were not present, guiding me in a sense, explicitly or implicitly. So I could say that, most of what I'm doing or what I am, it's thanks to you, and I really want to appreciate and present, my thanks to you and to my being grateful to what I received from you. There are many other teachers that I had during the years, and I took from everybody. But for me, you are the mother of my family constellation work. And because we're in this module talking about mother, we're doing now the interrupted reaching out movement towards the mother, IROM in English. You can find it in the literature. Could you please talk a little bit about what is this about this interrupted reaching out movement, how we can look at it, and what would be, just in a few words, the steps or the first step to do in order to recreate this healthy connection with the mother.
Mm-hmm. First, before I move on to that, I just want to say that I really value the way that you grabbed hold of the work and ran with it. Yeah? And I've said to you many times, it felt like you were a stallion, champing at the bit, raring to go, and I was tethering you, and I finally let you go. And I also have my own mentors. Yeah, I'm grateful to Bert Hellinger and Hunter Beaumont and many others, Ulrich Marr, who came before me, and they were my mentors. And so I'm just passing the work on in the best way I can. And I guess the interrupted reaching out movement is a particular, I don't want to say love of mine, a passion of mine. And probably because that's the first piece of personal work that I did in my own relationship with my mother, and it transformed my relationship with my mother, and I'm always still really appreciative of that. So the way Bert Hellinger described the interrupted reaching out movement is that we move towards our mothers and they're not available for whatever reason and we turn away. And then in every aspect of our lives thereafter, whenever we move towards something, whether it be an intimate partner, a job, a career, even a friend, anything that we move towards that we really want, we turn away from. So we repeat that movement throughout our lives until we can come face to face with our mothers and begin to heal that relationship. And it's not that the mother has to be sorted or healed herself, but we see her in the context of her own suffering and her own trauma, and something shifts in us. We open our hearts, and we've been doing various exercises that can facilitate that to help us to see our mothers for exactly who they are. And then later on, the same movement happens with our fathers. It's not exactly the same because developmentally it's a little later. We grow inside our mothers, we're born through our mothers' bodies, and we're breastfed, hopefully, with our mothers. So that closeness is the beginning of it all. But of course, the father's role is also crucial a little later on. So we need to do this interrupted reaching out movement to both parents in order to thrive. And I certainly felt, I mean, the strongest thing I felt personally was I'd been searching all my life for something. I didn't know what. And I stopped searching. It's like, it's not that I don't have any pain anymore or any problems. No, far from it.
And I think this is the beauty of the movement of the soul. When when something shifts inside of you, you don't looking for answers. There's no explanation needed. You just feel it, and you have it in your body, and you know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really appreciate of what you did this morning in the module. And my take on what happened this morning is, that the few sentences you just used and resting, surrendering, resting in my mother's arm is like feeling back home.
That's it. Yeah, that's what I call my work coming home.
So thank you so much. I think we're gonna stop for now the interview because we have a lot of work to do. But I'm inviting you to continue this interview maybe tomorrow or the day after, and put it also on a different perspective or a larger perspective. For the
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the client sits here.
Și clientul se așează aici
And you help them to lean.
și îl ajutați să se sprijine.
Looks like it. Can you just hold the microphone? Yes. Then you put your arms around like this.
Și vă puneți brațele în jurul clientului în felul ăsta.
Obviously, with women, you need to be sensitive to
Cu femeile e important
where
să
you
fiți
place your
atenți unde vă
hands,
puneți mâinile,
particularly if you're a man.
mai ales dacă ești bărbat.
But you are spooning the client.
With,
You call it spooning.
se numește a linguri pe client.
I'm like a spoon.